Now it's putting me, I have to go get the chat because it keeps giving me my notifications or something. Okay, just a minute. I need to uh, uh, need to go get the chat, which is on the live. There we go. Okay. All right. So let me just wish everyone. Okay, we are there. We have, um, let's see, almost got my screen set up so we can do this thing. All right.
Wire.
Pardon?
I have wire issue. Nothing's.
Yep.
Oh, it's hung up on a book. Okay. Usually it's long enough and everything's fine. I'm like, now I get it. It's
All right. So good morning, everyone, and welcome. We are going to start at footnote 54, which I'm going to share with you shortly. Um, but I just want to mention that this coming Saturday is going to be the interview with my mentor in art, Colleen Kibert. And Colleen is now 91 years old. She is like a national treasure. And she's going to introduce her book, which I put the cover of on the headline for today's notice. And I really, really urge you to come to this interview with Tim Holmes. Tim is going to be the moderator of the discussion, and I'm going to fly the Zoom. And uh, um, and what she has done is nothing less than pointed to the central idea of Jungian psychology, which Lawrence Jaffe gave us, and I read it again. The purpose of Jung's whole psychology is to make accessible to us that healing power which resides in our unconscious. And Colleen has been working on um, the creative process, which we all use. We all use it when we're doing anything in our lives practically, but people tend to put it in a cell over here and say it's art, and therefore I don't have to pay attention to it, maybe. I know I was like that for many years, and the reality is that we have to pay attention to it, and Colleen has, among other things, given us a beautiful chapter on the shadow. And that is just remarkable. Right after this, I'm going to start sending it out to the talking heads in the major news networks because Colleen has really essentialized what our problem is and why we're faced with the current election crisis that we have, I would say, in our country. And so I really hope that you'll come to the session next Saturday at 2 p.m. Eastern Time, 11 a.m. Pacific Time. You'll have to work out your time if you're in another time zone. I gave you some of them in today's announcement, but I really, really urge you to attend that session. It's going to be a wonderful session. And if you do nothing else, well, even if you can only dedicate 1 2 hour block next weekend, go to her interview first and come back and watch the video of this session. Okay, now and I have by the way, I have sent out let's see, I have sent out to everyone today um, all the links and stuff, but I want to just make sure that everyone, uh, if you haven't registered on our MailChimp so that you can uh, be sure not to miss anything here, I urge you to go to this link, which I'm putting in the YouTube chat, and register for Wisdom Path, which is our occasional videos about usually with authors, and our weekly reminders on the Wednesday and Sunday live events that we do every week. So if you haven't done it yet, please do it. This will give you access to our Zoom meeting. And so if you wish to, you can become part of our panel. And let's see, what else should I say about that? Probably nothing. But anyway, go to that link. I send out notices twice a week but only to the people who register for specific things, usually. So that is the Sunday morning group and the Wednesday advanced reading group. I occasionally send out a blast email to everybody on our list because of something that I think is important. I did that this morning with the Wisdom Path announcement about Colleen's talk. Okay, so we are in Scutinies, and this is our 6th session on Scutinies. Naturally enough, you're probably wondering when we're going to get to the 7 sermons to the dead, and I have to tell you very honestly that I don't know. We'll get there when we get there. We're closing in on it.
Yeah, they haven't croaked yet, so we have to just take our time and wait.
Right.
6 of them are down, but there's one we're waiting on. And it's
Right.
like,
And now, one moment. I thought I had it up on my screen, but let's see. There it is. Okay. All right. So this is the reading for today. I've got it. I'm sharing my screen with you. And at this point in the Red Book, Jung is having a conversation with a shadow of a dead one. And I'm going to go back about a page and a half from where we were last week so that we have in context the new material that's coming up today. I'll just read through this fairly quickly until I get to the point where it talks about let's see, I'm sorry. What do you ask about love? That's an important section, but you need the context. So I'm just going to read through to that point. Okay, the shadow of the dead one raised its voice and said, "You see, or do you still not see what the living do with your life? They fritter it away, but with me you live yourself, since I belong to you. I belong to your invisible following and community. Do you believe that the living see you? They see only your shadow, not you, you servant, you bearer, you vessel. How you hold forth, am I?" So this is Jung responding. "How you hold forth, Am I at your mercy? Should I no longer see the light of day? Should I become a shadow with a living body? You are formless and beyond grasp, and you emanate the coldness of the grave, a breath of emptiness. To let myself be buried alive, what are you thinking of? Too soon, it seems to me, I must die first. Do you have the honey that pleases my heart and the fire that warms my hands? What are you, you mournful shadows, you specters of children? What do you want with my blood? Truly, you are even worse than men. Men give little, yet what do you give? Do you make the living, the warm beauty, or joy perhaps? Or should all this go to your gloomy hell? What do you offer in return? Mysteries? Will the living live from these? I regard you, I regard your mysteries as tricks if the living cannot live from them. But she interrupted me and cried, Impetuous one, stop! You take my breath away. We are shadows. Become a shadow and you will grasp what we give. I do not want to die to descend into your darkness. But, she said, you need not die. You must only let yourself be buried. In the hopes of resurrection? No joking now. But she spoke calmly. You suspect that what will happen. Triple walls before you and invisibility. To hell with your longing and feeling. At least you do not love us. So we will cost you less dearly than the men who roll in your love and patience and have you make a fool of yourself. My dead one, I think you are speaking my language. She replied to me scornfully, Men love, and you? What an error. All this means is that you want to run away from yourself. What do you do to men? You tempt and coax them into megalomania, to which you fall victim. But it grieves me, pains me, howls at me. I feel a great longing. Everything soft complains, and my heart yearns. But she was unsparing. Your heart belongs to us, she said. What do you want with men? Self-defense against men so that you walk on your own 2 feet, not on human crutches. Men need the undemanding, but they are always wanting love to be able to run away from themselves. This ought to stop. Why do fools go out and preach the gospel to the Negroes and then ridicule in their own country? Why do these hypocritical preachers speak of love, divine and human love, and use the same gospel to justify the right to wage war and commit murderous injustice? Above all, what do they teach others when they themselves stand up to their necks in the black mud of deception and self-deceit? Have they cleaned their own house? Have they recognized the driven out of their own devil? Because they do none of this, they preach love to be able to run away from themselves and to do to others what they should do to themselves. But this greatly prized love given to one's own self burns like fire. These hypocrites and liars have noticed this, as you have, and prefer to love others. Is that love? It is false hypocrisy. It always begins in yourself and in all things, and above all with love. Do you believe that one who wounds himself unsparingly does the other a good deed with his love? No, of course you don't believe it. You even know that he only teaches the other how one must wound oneself so that he can compel others to express sympathy. Therefore, you should be a shadow, since this is what men need. How can they get away with the hypocrisy and foolishness of your love if you yourself cannot? For everything begins with yourself, but your horse cannot refrain from whinnying. Even worse, Your virtue is a wagging dog, a growling dog, a licking dog, a barking dog, and you call that human love, but love is to bear and endure oneself. It begins with this. It is truly about you. You are not yet tempered. Other fires must yet come over you until you have accepted your solitude and learned to love. What do you ask about love? What is love? To live above all, that is more than love. Is war love? You are bound to see that human love is still good enough for a means like other means. Therefore, above all, solitude, until every softness toward yourself has been burned out of you, you should learn to freeze. I see only graves before me, I answered. What cursed will is above me? The will of God that is stronger than you, you slave, you vessel. You have fallen into the hands of the greater. He knows no pity. Your Christian shrouds have fallen, the veils that blinded your eyes. The God has become strong again. The yoke of men is lighter than the yoke of God. Therefore, everyone seeks to yoke the other out of mercy. But he who does not fall into the hands of men falls into those of God. May he be well, and may woe betide him. There is no escape. Is that freedom? I cried. The highest freedom, only the God above you, through yourself. Comfort yourself with this and that as well as you can. The God bolts doors that you cannot open. Let your feelings whimper like puppies. Let your feelings whimper like puppies. The ears on high are deaf. But I answered, is there no outrage for the sake of the human? Outrage? I laugh at your outrage. The God knows only power and creation. He commands and you act. Your anxieties are laughable. There is only one road, the military road of the Godhead. The dead one spoke these unsparing words to me I did as I did not want to obey anyone. I had to obey this voice, and she spoke unsparing words about the power of God. I had to accept these words. We have to greet a new light, a new blood-red sun, a painful wonder. No one forces me to. Only the foreign only the foreign will in me. Only the foreign will in me commands, and I cannot escape, since I find no grounds to do so. The sun appearing to me swam in a sea of blood and wailing. Therefore I said to the dead one, should it be the sacrifice of joy? But the dead one replied, the sacrifice of joy, provided that you do it yourself. Joy should neither be made nor sought. It should come, if it must come. I demand your service. You should not serve your personal devil. That leads to superfluous pain. True joy is simple. It comes and exists from itself, and is not to be sought here and there. At the risk of encountering black night, you must devote yourself to me and seek no joy. Joy can never, ever be prepared, but exists of its own accord or exists not at all. All you must do is fulfill your task, nothing else. Joy comes from fulfillment, but not from longing. I have the power. I command. You obey. I fear that you will destroy me. She answered, I am life that destroys only the unfit. Therefore, take care that you are no unapt tool. You want to rule yourself, you steer your ship onto the sand. Build your bridge, stone upon stone. but don't think of wanting to take the helm. You go astray if you want to escape my service. There is no salvation without me. Why are you dreaming and hesitating? You see, I answered, that I am blind and do not know where to begin. It always begins with the neighbor. Where is the church? Where is the community? This is pure madness, I cried out indignantly. Why do you speak of a church? Am I a prophet? How can I claim such for myself? I am just a man who is not entitled to know any better than others. But she replied, I want the church. It is necessary for you and for others. Otherwise, what you are going to do with those whom I force you to feed, uh, force to your feet. The beautiful and natural will nestle in the terrible and dark and will show the way. The church is something natural. The only ceremony must be dissolved and become spirit. The bridge should lead out beyond humanity, inviolable, far, far of the air. There is a community of spirits bounded on outer signs with a solid meaning. Cease, I cried. That doesn't bear thinking about. It's incomprehensible. But she continued. Community with the dead is what both you and the dead need. Do not commingle with any of the dead, but stand apart from them and give to each his due. The dead demand your expiatory prayers. And when she spoke these words, she raised her voice and evoked the dead in my name. You dead, I call you. You shades of the departed who have cast the torment of living, come here. My blood, the juice of my will be your meal and your drink. Sustain yourself from me, so that life and speech will be yours. Come, you dark and restless ones, I will refresh you with my blood, the blood of a living one, so that you will gain speech and life in me and through me. The God forces me to address this prayer to you, so that you come to life. Too long have we left you alone. Let us build the bond of community so that the living and the dead image will become one and the past will live on in the present. Our desire pulls us to the living world and we are lost in our desire. Come drink the living blood. Drink your fill so that we will be saved from the inextinguishable and unrelenting power of vivid longing for visible grasping and present being. Drink from our blood the desire that begets evil, as quarrel, discord, ugliness, violent deed, and famishment. Take, eat. This is my body that lives for you. Take, eat. Drink, this is my blood whose desire flows for you. Come celebrate a Last Supper with me for your redemption and mine. I need community with you so that I fall prey neither to the community of the living nor to my desire and yours, whose envy is insatiable and therefore begets evil. Help me so I do not forget that my desire is a sacrificial fire for you. You are my community. I live what I can live for the living, but the excess of my longings belongs to you, you shades. We need to live with you. Be auspicious to us and open our closed spirits so that we become blessed with the redeeming light. May it happen thus. When the dead one had ended this prayer, she turned to me again and said, Great is the dead, but the God needs no sacrificial prayer. He has neither good will nor ill will. He is kind and fearful, though not actually so, but only seems to you this thus. But the dead hear your prayers, since they are still of human nature and not free of goodwill and ill will. Do you not understand? The history of humanity is older and wiser than you. Was there a time uh, when there were no dead? Vain deception. Only recently have men begun to forget the dead and to think that they have now begun the real life, sending them into a frenzy. Okay, I'm going to stop there for a moment and give Jordan an opportunity to reply. I'm going to step away here again for a moment. I'm sorry, but that is my life. Well, you're muted, Jordan.
There we go. There we go. This is kind of interesting that Jung has put the soul in a soliloquy that's, in a sense, petulant. The expiatory prayers, I mean, to apologize, I would say apologize for what? There was an original sin piece that someone needs to feel guilty first, which seems to try to come around to responsibility, but that's a false place to begin. You don't need to feel horrible to have responsibility. You look at something of value, and since you value it, it's nourished. I don't have to feel shame for a flower in my garden to water it and keep it healthy. And I think in that regard, what's interesting is that when I mentioned the petulant piece back paragraphs before, where is it? The soul is telling Jung that these hypocrites and liars have noticed this and prefer to love others, i.e., not themselves. It always begins in yourself in all things, and above all with love. So I think here, when the soul then says, do you believe that one who wounds himself unsparingly does the other a good deed with his love? No, of course you don't believe it. What's interesting right there is it's talking about self-sabotage. And the only thing about self-sabotage is, if I go back here to, because they do none of this, they preach love to be able to run away from themselves. What's interesting is then further in that paragraph, these hypocrites and liars begin in yourself and in all things. So the soul knows that it's untrue for Jung that, do you believe that one who wounds himself unsparingly does the other a good deed with his love? Well, what's interesting is, the soul is saying, I understand you, Jung, that you don't believe that, because someone who wounds themselves is actually performing self-sabotage. And the problem with self-sabotage is with the soul, which is trying to sidestep it. Self-sabotage tries to give someone a false sense of, I know how this is going to end up. I have control because I can make sure I mess it up. Instead of having the wise vulnerability to let the chaos happen and work with solutions. So as it goes through this whole expression, through all these paragraphs, and I'm glad we went this far, because then, come, you dark and restless one, I will refresh you with my blood. This brings life back. And that's saying to connect with self, connect with others after self. So when the God forces me to address this prayer to you so that you come to life, it's addressing the prayer so it's not anymore an expiatory or apologetic prayer. And I think now that you're back, great is the need of the dead, but I think what's interesting is great is the need of people to avoidantly live in the past and anxiously live in the past instead of securely living in the present. So I think it's interesting that he's put the soul to this great soliloquy, as if the soul is this adolescent growing up, but so wise and so wordy and so verbose. And then now Jung is the simple one. responding with few words. So in a sense, he's turned the tables and put the honestly put the expiatory and then trying to prove it on the soul rather than on himself. So this is a really interesting set of passages. I'll just stop there.
Yeah, Jordan, I'm a little confused. Did I skip what's on the screen now? What do you ask about love? What is love?
No, we started up in there.
Did I read that?
Yeah,
Just
you did. Your heart belongs to us. I think. Hold on,
okay.
where? Because that's with footnote 52.
Yeah, 57, right after footnote 57.
Yeah, we no, you read it, and I think what's interesting here is we went so far with you reading so much there that we had about five different Jungian whole thoughts, three
Yeah,
from her and two from him. And
right.
the soul was in this big monologue of a soliloquy, um, honestly, crying for help. I mean, so I hate to say it this way, but the soul was playing the victim to get you to try not to play the victim. I mean, it was it
Okay,
was a
well,
little.
I didn't mean to read that much because I wanted to focus more on the latter part of what I read then. But let me point out here that Jung, at this point in the text, is um, in the midst of his precognitions for World War One. Okay, the date on this, which is at footnote 54, is December 7th, 1915. Okay, and he's having a discussion. This is a year later, a year after the main guts of the Red Book. And he's looking back on it, on the war, which is now going on and in full force. It hasn't resolved yet. It started August 1st, 1914. And so he's a year and a half later having these conversations with her. And I think that that's pretty important because he's trying to get his mind around what's happening both to him psychologically and to the world psychologically, the collective. Go ahead.
I was going to say, and if I flip and turn back on myself to not then, in a sense, punitively say the soul is in this confession of trying to be manipulative to say don't be manipulative. If I turn it back around, this is simply Jung going within. And so the voices that we're hearing are more from within than the spare few responses of that which comes from the exterior. So it's a both and. But I appreciate when you said him getting his head around, what's happening outside and what's happening inside. And appropriately, he's going inside first to see so that I think he can have wits and discernment on the outside as to not getting shaken around on his foundation, so to speak.
Yeah. And Richard challenges us. It says it seems that Jung is stuck on the Dionysian mysteries at this point, and his archetypes are just messing with his psyche. Did he ever get past this? Well, yes, Richard. He wrote for nearly 50 years after this, and
Well, that's an
yeah,
interesting comment from Richard. I appreciate
yeah,
that because I think you're bringing up a good point about how overly intellectual he's getting now in the soul, which is
right,
absolutely countergrain to the soul.
yes,
And so what's interesting is that your comment brings up Viktor Frankl's um, those who cannot find deep meaning in life lose themselves in too much pleasure, which is the Dionysian piece, except I would say, sure, except you boring prude, that intellectual, if you can't find deep pleasure in life, you lose yourself in way too much meaning. So I think it's both. Right? You got to strike the balance. Otherwise, there's the sexual prude, and then there's the orgiastic Dionysian. And the thing is, if I take the sexual piece out of it, it's about the erotic, the vital. What is
Yeah.
life? So I think instead of pendulum back and forth, your point is well taken. Of he's basically foundering in the Dionysian myth, yes, but he's not. His soul is. So what's interesting, he's not projecting externally anymore. He's projecting on the soul, which I think is an interesting piece because we really don't have the soul's voice here. We have Jung character acting what the soul might have said, which is somewhat presumptuous, honestly. I think right now we're kind of he's skimming the surface deep within, if that puts it differently.
Right. Okay. Elias gives us a compliment. Good morning. The first time in group Jung's theories have been really helpful over the last year. Richard, nowhere. It's all just blah, blah, blah. He's talking a lot, but not saying anything. And that's quoting David Byrne. Okay, well, uh, I guess I'm not going to comment on that.
Well, and I think the quoting David Byrne there, I think those lyrics apply to a certain person in a certain song that aren't Jung. So are you just applying that quote here out of context? I'd be curious.
Yeah. State of Awakening says, for me, this speaks to the inclination of human nature to avoid looking at and accepting oneself completely. We are much more adept at focusing on our judgment and forgiveness upon the other. And it is very humbling experience to see oneself clearly and fully, and this has the propensity to drop one to their knees, so to speak. And Elias says, could this spirit within be his anima phi? I don't know what he means by that. In the unconscious. Well, it certainly has aspects of the anima. I think the anima might be referred to as something somewhat different, because here he's talking to a shade. He's not talking to his soul, or at least he doesn't perceive it as his soul.
And I think too with the anima, we should probably, I find it important lately to clear out the early 20th century sexism. Originally in Latin, anima or anima meant soul, and it did not mean feminine. It meant generative, as opposed to the rational part of the soul. And so I'm kind of looking at defeminizing the anima and demasculinizing the animus to be generative and rational, or generative and formative. So yes, I think he is
Good point.
in that point, but I think,
Good point.
I think removing the sexism, we all both have generative and formative. Now, the women, the females, may be more intense because in their generative, they can also breathe life. They can give life. Men can't. We can seed it, but not conceive and birth it. But I think back to, if I take that out and stop shaming men because women are better, or shaming women because men have this that they don't, I think there's dignity and difference. So I think generative and formative is, anima is generative, animus is formative or rational. So I think we're dealing with quadrant 3, bottom left corner, Colleen's diagram.
Creative wellspring.
Yeah, the anima, that's where the creative wellspring enters.
Yeah.
Okay. And honestly, enter. If you think enter, that's more of a male thing, except it's a female action, generative. So again, remove the male female, because I think there's interpenetration, both and we all each have generative and formative qualities. So my take now is to try to step past this is my anima. No, this is my generative. This is my creative, versus this is, well, what do I do about it? What's my masculine formative? Well, and even drop the masculine part. Just, am I actionable? The heart of the matter has to be in what I do. So I think the both and happens there. Anyway, monologue over.
Yeah. Elias says, phi psi. I don't know what he means by phi/psi. I'm sorry, Elias, you'll have to explain it. Would we be, would phi psi would be feeling introverted? Okay, I see it. All right, so he's referring to the Myers-Briggs. Okay, so phi psi would be feeling introverted and sensing introverted, which for Jung were in the unconscious, if I remember correctly. Uh, correct. Okay. And well, I'm going to correct that. Jung was highly intuitive. Jung was a very intuitive individual. So he was NT. All right. So when Elias is referring to this, um, he is referring to the Myers-Briggs type indicator. I'll very briefly explain what that is for those of you who don't know. There are four spectra, and all of us fall on each of these four spectra. The first one is introverted versus extroverted. And so an extroverted person goes to a party and likes to sit in the middle of the room telling jokes. An introverted person goes to a party and sits over in the corner and talks to one person or two people, maybe. Okay, so that's introverted and extroverted. You can figure out where you fall, but the spectrum is long, and there can be millions of fine data points in the middle of that. Okay, the next spectrum is sensing and intuitive. A sensing person, you have to show 1,000 trees, and they still won't believe there's a forest. An intuitive person, you can show 3 trees, and they assume there's a forest.
Right.
Okay, and so Jung was really intuitive, and this whole book is coming from his intuition. A sensing person would never have gotten anywhere near this, okay, because they just wouldn't have seen the forest. And the amazing thing, the immensity of Jung's own psyche is the amazing thing here. It's the forest. Okay. And so a sensing person probably bounces off Jung because they hear all these things and they just don't have enough data points to interact with it. Whereas an intuitive person rocks it. Okay. And maybe not instantly. Certainly with me, it wasn't instant, but fairly early on, I started to know that Jung had something for me that I wasn't getting from my logic-based career. So that's sensing and intuition. Then there's thinking and feeling. The thinking side is logical. The feeling side um, is the opposite of logical. So the thinking side is rational. The feeling side is irrational, but they both make good decisions. Okay. And so the thinking side tends to want to lay down railroad tracks. Okay. And the feeling side wants to go up ahead and figure out where the pass is through the mountains, where you're going to lay the railroad tracks
Right.
and feel that out. And, uh, and so the thinking side is in every book that we have. Anything that we say, anything that I say comes from the rational side once it's spoken. but before it's spoken, it's in my psyche and it's irrational. So anything that you see in a book, in philosophy, anything like that, yeah, those are all logical ways of thinking about various things. They're railroad tracks. The scientific method is like that. And I criticize our school district now because, man, they have made the curriculum, they've sliced it down to the finest point, and it's all logical. But I look at the curriculum, and I say, well, you forgot the children. you know, they're, it's all well and good to teach people this, but where are the children? you know,
Well,
and
that's a good point because context, and it's interesting that the rational and the irrational, but then people say, oh, so the creative is irrational. No. And then it moves between sense and nonsense. Oh, so the creative is nonsense. No.
yeah,
And so what's interesting is there's the reasons in the rational, but the reasons are just unreasonable in the intuitive and feeling irrational.
yeah,
But that doesn't mean they don't make sense. And so it's
exactly,
and so I mean I would look at the ground and the garden as the creative, as the intuitive and the feeling, and then the roots in that, and stems and leaves and flowers as the thinking and the sensation. So in a sense, the above and the light is thinking and sensation, but then the below and the dark, which I would reframe to depths, seen, unhidden, or hidden, is the intuitive and feeling. So I think we oscillate between these four:
right,
intuition, thinking, sensation. But I think we get a little tripped up when we then try to say, oh, they're opposites. No, they're only opposites when they're together. And then they dance rather than being against. So I think
right.
it's, how,
And you're on this spectrum, and you're going a little bit this way and a little bit that way all the time,
right.
right? And
And
so
that's
the
how we look.
Myers-Briggs is all well and good, but it's railroad tracks. In other words, you can go and take the
Yes.
test, and the Myers-Briggs people will tell you, well, this is what you are. Well, no, you're not. I mean, you may have been that during this test, but you may have swapped out. Something happened as you walked out the door of the test center, and you swapped out sensing instead of intuitive, or
Well, and
vice
and I
versa.
love that. That's a great example, the swapping out, because let's say I'm going to take my driver's test
Yeah,
and I'm 16, and they pull me into this parking lot and say, parallel park right there. Okay, so I do. Well, this is early in the morning and all the businesses are closed, and we're both in the only car that's in that parking lot. So I back in and I pass and I get my license. Well, later that day when the stores are open, I'm coming back. Well, I back in and I smash into this car, and the driver's ed teacher is sitting there, arms crossed on the sidewalk, and says, well, but you have to make sure no one's in the space. And I said, but I parked there before. And so I think there's you got to keep the blinders off. Like you say, you come out, here's the rule. Oh, but it's a little change now because you can't do that there. I have to parallel park or park somewhere else. So I think the discernment, the
right.
discernment piece comes up, not just to, I can only park where I tested. This is about taking it into the world and slow down because there's a bump coming up. I mean, so uh,
Okay, there's one other spectrum, and that's judging and perceiving. And very simply, a judging person takes a grocery list to the grocery store and picks stuff off the shelf from that list. And a perceiving person, this is my wife, she insists on making this list all the time. And so Alexa is her friend. Uh, but I'm a perceiving person, which is the one difference that the two of us have in this test. And so I go and I just go up and down the rows and pick food off the shelves. We both eat, but I buy the ice cream, right? because my wife always forgets the ice cream. And yesterday I bought 3 packages of Klondike bars for $12 when they would have cost 15 if we bought them separately, or 14.97, I guess. Um, so that's a snap judgment. Yeah, I'm going to buy 3 packages of Klondike bars because I saved $3. And my wife might say, well, if I pay 14 or $12 for three packages of Klondike bars, that's over the budget that I put for ice cream this week. So I'm just going to pay $4.99 for the one package of Klondike bars we need right now, and and so she pays $4.99 and I pay 12. But in the end, since we eat Klondike bars often, almost every night, um, it gets me ahead in the long run. So the Myers-Briggs type indicator instrument is an important instrument to understand. There's a book also called People Types and Tiger Stripes, and it basically says that you tend toward being one thing, like the stripes of a tiger, and not a different stripe, right? But the reality is that if the situation changes, you may flip. So in my case, I'm an NTP, and the average Marine general is an STJ. And what I realized early on was that when I put my uniform on and go into a Marine environment, I'm STJ too. I become STJ when I put that uniform on. And uh, and as an intuitive, I tend to see meaning in things long before the S general. So I can be an STJ, but my natural stripe is intuitive. So I both get all the details and understand what it means. And the people who are simply testing it S um, say, how did you get that meaning? They don't understand it.
Well, and
And
I think
then,
what's interesting about that is you're then describing the personality of recon and how I'm looking up not through the windshield that everybody sees, how I'm over the horizon looking for what no one else sees. And so there's smart is being able to put together a good scenario. Genius is being able to put together what doesn't even exist in the first place
mhm,
from the context of the present. So that STJ, the general piece, making the actionable decisions with what they know. Now, their scouts, their recon have gone forward to go ahead and see what's not factored in the variables now.
yeah. Um, okay, so that we have digressed onto the Myers-Briggs, but and at least now I understand what what the shorthand was that back here Elias Lyman was using. And State of Awakening made one comment. As a female, I do not sense a difference in my inner demon as was gendered by Jung, in that he assigned the animus to the female as opposed to the anima in the male. Um, I think it's a fair point that Jung was only just discovering these things. Okay. And now we have to see that, we do have both anima and animus within us, as Jordan was saying. And so we can't just attribute to all women that they have animus and all men they have anima. Um, there again, it's a spectrum, and it's a sliding scale, meaning even if you've found a point on that spectrum that you are this minute, it may slide differently for different circumstances. So in the Marines, we always say it depends on the situation and the terrain. It depends on what's going on in your life at any given point and where you are and whether you're awake or asleep or what have you. So,
Well, and I
um,
think we can beautifully confuse the point even further. If I frame in, no, not the feminine, it's the masculine. Do you have mom issues or dad issues? So, who is the mentor and who is the tormentor? And then with wits and experience, who was the mentor tormentor? So, which one's generative mentor? The tormentor's tearing stuff down. So, which one's which? And what's interesting there is that if I play that game, then it's not the masculine or feminine. It's which one do I identify with, or which one challenges me to be more alive. And every time I move from one of those poles to the other, I haven't left both and I
yeah,
don't need to bounce around. I'm still navigating in balance wherever I am on that path. So I
right.
think it's
And
a fair point.
this became an issue between Tim Holmes and me last Wednesday in our advanced group, where Tim was taking the position that everything is duality. And I said to Tim, no, it's not, Tim. Everything isn't duality. And unfortunately, it was a short exchange, and I think he was a little surprised that I was taking exception to what he was saying. Uh, and so I was off put a little bit by the exchange myself, and I was trying to get a handle on it. And I spoke to my Buddhist wife, and she said, "Well, you're talking about uh, the relative and the absolute, the difference
Mhm.
between the relative and the absolute." And yes, in the relative, there's always duality, and in the absolute, there's none. And the point is, even when you start talking about it, the difference between the relative and the absolute, you've introduced duality. Okay, so we're both right.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
I was going
but
to say, yeah, go ahead.
yeah. And so Cherie said a few things that I wanted to comment on here. She said she saw the film Mr. Jones 4 times straight. And I think that's great, Cherie. And I wish everyone would go see that film because it explains quite clearly why the Ukrainians will never buckle under to the Russians and why, even after 70 years of Soviet rule, the Ukrainians created a separate country and have been living in it now for 30 years. And if you haven't seen that movie, I urge you to see it. It covers both the time when Stalin was fooling the world about the benefits of communism, and it also covers the writing of Animal Farm by George Orwell. And it's really a valuable movie in that way. So I urge you to see it. Um,
But actually, back to your and Tim's, moment of discontent, as it were. Um, it's interesting because that discontent will occur when people are talking about that. the relative and the absolute. But when you get back to action, you each might make the same decision. And so I find
Absolutely.
what's interesting is if someone's always talking facts, 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 that used to just annoy the heck out of me. I'm like, why do you need to prove yourself so much? What's the judge and jury? Who did you have to prove yourself to? So why don't you just do it? I mean, Nike, just do it. And then the person who's just moves through intuitively and groks it all,
Yeah.
sees the two poles, but stays on the road or creates a new road. But either way, they're just navigating. Well, they have all those pieces and parts, but they're not talking about them.
Well, and that's what Colleen and Tim and I are all doing. We see all the roads. We see what
Right.
Jung did. We see what Maslow did. And the reason that I've been struggling with Jung for over 30 years is I said, why didn't he say something before the wars? Why let the wars carry on? And the fact is that he couldn't have done anything about it.
Right.
And and we have to realize it for ourselves. And uh, and so he, at this point in time in his life, was struggling with what do these prefigurations and visions and dreams that he's having before World War One and immediately after. He's struggling with what all that means. And, on August the 1st, 1914, he had the intuition of the collective unconscious. He finally realized that it wasn't just him that was having these prefigurative dreams. It was everyone at some level, maybe not consciously, but everyone at some level was not in good order. And the only way to stop it um, as they saw it at that time was to have a war. And obviously we have plenty of human beings in the world who still think that that's the solution. And and that's going to continue for maybe thousands more years because humanity simply hasn't grown up enough yet to understand that there are other solutions that we could arrive at, or they're grabbing for power. And and so when Jung said in psychology the unconscious, which became symbols of transition in the libido, he said, in times of peace plan for war, and in times of war plan for peace. Okay, well, that's a duality. And I certainly, as a retired officer from the Marine Corps, um, I understand the need for planning for war. Okay, and when I went to the National War College, the statistic that they gave at that time, and this is 40 years ago now, was there were 65 wars going on at that time in the world, 65. And the most prominent one at that time was the Iran-Iraq War between Iran and Iraq over Sunni and Shia positions, presumably. But that war dragged on for 8 years. They probably younger people don't even know that, but in the late 70s and early 80s, this Iran-Iraq war was just dragging on, and they were pummeling each other. Um, and and then when the irony was that when Iraq attacked Kuwait and caused the U.S. to want to come in, because of our strategic national interests. Um, and the U.S. started to attack Iraq. Iraq sent all their jet fighters to Iran. They ran to Iran to keep them safe from being attacked. And so Shuri has also asked this question: was Jung's grandfather related to Goethe? And that is unknown. Jung didn't know for sure, but he did think that his grandfather um, may have been born out of wedlock. In other words, his grandfather was the child of Goethe, not the husband of his great grandmother. Okay, that was
Mm-hmm.
the rumor. Jung never got to the bottom of it, and so I don't think we know. But he was always interested in Goethe, of course, because of Faustus, which he spent quite a lot of time analyzing.
Well, it's interesting about your Iran and Iraq um, piece there, where it's one of those. Hey, we've been warring for thousands of years, intermittently, back and forth, and oh wait, right now we better save the plane so we can fight again later. I mean,
Yeah,
so there, in that sense, the example tells me when looking for responsibility, do not look at the prominent public, obvious actors. Look instead for money. Who has an interest and who has the capability? And it's
yeah,
usually no one that you see in the public. So there's a lot of reactionary, I think, versus forensic responsiveness in terms of assigning who is actually motivating what. So the puppet master, in a sense, coming in because they're fighting, all of a sudden, oh wait, hold on, pause, freeze tag, let's bring our planes over. Can you protect our planes so we can fight later? I mean, which to me is an irony. At the same time, it's also farcical. I mean, that through history repeating itself because no one reads history and it's written by the winners. Well, what did the losers have to say? I mean, the Romans versus
right.
the wrong
Well,
side.
and the terrible thing is that we've allowed the GOP to run social studies out of the curriculum. And so lots of people do not understand the consequences of things that they're doing. They just live their
Well, and they
lives. And
ran social studies out of the curriculum. So the health and reactionary propaganda we see, I mean, now Nestle is a food company. They're getting into diabetes medicine. This is the same conflict of interest as Bayer going into food. And what's interesting is it's basically just here, we're going to make sure with our processed food, we're going to keep you sick so we can make money in the hospitals while we make money on the food to keep you sick. So it's even the balanced diet is the
yeah,
unbalanced diet. I mean, there's a
right.
whole lot of what are you told to react to versus nope, that doesn't make any sense. No, thank
Yeah.
you.
And if you want to understand how big the problem is, um, I teach in a school um, that literally is 2 miles from the inner harbor of Annapolis, Maryland. It's the harbor that colonists went to in 1649. Okay, that's how long ago it was established. And in our town, we have the the Capitol building has the only wooden dome um, of any state capital in the country. And on it is a lightning rod that was put there by Benjamin Franklin. And we have uh, in the Naval Academy, which you can tour anytime you want, there are tours going on all the time. You can go to the museum in the Naval Academy where the entire top floor is the largest collection of model ships in the world. And for example, um, they have a more than 5 foot long ivory, made out of ivory, model ship of HMS Victory, which was the flagship of the British fleet in the Battle of Trafalgar. Okay. And it's made out of ivory. Okay. And so this is kind of the gems that we have in our community, which was the first capital of the United States, among other things. But nobody knows that. But in any case,
Mm-hmm.
my school is only 2 miles from that place. And we have many children in my school who have never been to that inner harbor, have never been there.
Yeah.
And and don't know it, really don't know it even exists. Okay.
Well,
And
reminds me of teaching the advanced martial arts class with inner city underprivileged kids who had flunked out of school, but the summer was reteach so they can continue. But the first thing I did is we went and planted carrots, and just in the university garden across the street. Some of them had never crossed across to a different place where I go from urban not community college, but urban college campus to, oh, the grounds of the estate of the president's mansion with a lake and grass and gardens and trees. Well, the first thing that happened when anything was ready to be pulled is I pulled a carrot out of the ground and I just brushed it off and I took a bite. And I said, anyone else want to pull a carrot? And one kid goes, oh my God, that's dirty. Don't eat that. I said, well, where do you think carrots come from? Oh, well, that's easy. They come from the back room and they're in cardboard boxes. My brother puts them on the shelf.
right.
Well, what I realized is that 4 miles from that shelf was the first piece of green or grass or anything. And that kid had never been more than 2 to 6 blocks, away. It was all asphalt, chain link, gravel, and concrete, bricks and
Right.
buildings, and there was no nature. So just even the carrot with the dirt was alien. He was actually a little worried that I might get sick because there was still dirt on it. I mean, it's like, no, it's going to help my immune system. But looking at context, even 2 miles away, they haven't been to that inner harbor.
Yeah.
Something right under your nose,
Well,
and you don't.
and yeah, and not even knowing, not even knowing that the Capitol building is the building in which George Washington resigned his commission to become president of the United States. It's the building. And right across the street from the Capitol is the Maryland Inn, which was built in 1690. And it is the building in which the Treaty of Paris, which ended the American Revolution, was signed in that building
Mm-hmm.
in 1783. Oh my God. How do we even, but yeah,
Well, just that point. I mean, I remember going to look at renting this third floor place in Philadelphia at one point, and we got into a conversation. And I used to be an architect, kind of thing came out. They go, "Oh, well, let me show you something. Because see our driveway, you see this gravel. It looks kind of quirky, but this is the old York Road. Um, George Washington and others used to hang out in the basement because there's a well and a fountain that's natural, and they would stop for respite. And I started thinking, well, I said, well, what? What are you talking about? I mean, well, so we go down in the basement. There's this whole nother world of this place hadn't changed in 250 years. This is where they used to come through and hang out. And, the house on top of it is one thing, but it's interesting that that whole world was hidden in that basement.
yeah. Well, anyway, folks, if you've ever thought about going to Colonial Williamsburg, please know that that has been turned into a theme park right outside the College of William and Mary. And But if you come to Annapolis, Maryland, we still live in our colonial city. And many of the buildings in downtown Annapolis are from that time. And it's an incredible place to live. Um, and so, Sherry, thank you for asking those questions, but I think we have to get back to the Red Book. And Jordan, would you mind reading from the beginning of number 5? I'm going to put it back on the screen so
Sure.
everybody can see it, and I'll be right back, but I'll put that up first.
So section 5, continuing.
Right.
When the dead one had uttered all these words, she disappeared. I sank into gloominess and dull confusion. When I looked up again, I saw my soul in the upper realms, hovering, irradiated by the distant brilliance that streamed from the Godhead. And I called out, "You know what has taken place. You see that it surpasses the power and understanding of a man. But I accept it for your sake and mine, to be crucified on the tree of life. Oh, bitterness! Oh, painful silence! If it weren't you, my soul, who touched the fiery heaven and the eternal fullness, how could I? I cast myself before human animals. Oh, manly torment! I must let my virtues, my best ability, be torn apart, because they are still thorns in the side of the human animal. Not death for the sake of the best, but befouling and rending of the most beautiful for the sake of life. Alas, there is nowhere a salutary deception to protect me from having the last supper with my carcass. The dead want to live from me. Why did you see me as the one to drink the cess of humanity that poured out of Christendom? Haven't you had enough of beholding the fiery fullness, my soul? Do you still want to fly entire into the glaring white light of the Godhead? Into what shades of horror are you plunging me? Is the devil's pool so deep that its mud sullies even your glowing robe? Where do you get the right to do me such a foul deed? Let the beaker of the disgusting filth pass from me. But if this be not your will, then climb past fiery heaven and lodge your charges and topple the throne of God, the dreadful. Proclaim the right of men also before the gods, and take revenge on them for the infamous deed of humanity. Since only gods are able to spur on the human worm to acts of colossal atrocity, let my fate suffice, and let men manage human destiny. Oh, my mother humanity, thrust the terrible worm of God, the strangler of men, from you. Do not venerate him for the sake of his terrible poison. A drop suffices. And what is a drop to him, who at the same time is all emptiness and all fullness? As I proclaimed these words, I noticed that Philemon stood behind me and had given them to me. He came alongside me invisibly, and I felt the presence of the good and the beautiful, and he spoke to me with a deep, soft voice. Remove, O man, the divine too from your soul, as far as you can manage. What a devilish farce she carries on with you, as long as she still arrogates divine power over you. She is an unruly child and a bloodthirsty daemon at the same time, a tormentor of humans without equal, precisely because she has divinity. Why? Where from? Because you venerate her. The dead too want the same thing. Why don't they stay quiet? Because they have not crossed over to the other side. Why do they want sacrifice? So they can live. But why do they still want to live with men? Because they want to rule. They have not come to an end with their craving for power, since they died still lusting for power. A child, an old man, an evil woman, a spirit of the dead, and a devil are beings who need to be humored. Fear the soul, despise her, love her, just like the gods. May they be far from us. But above all, never lose them, because when they are lost, they are malicious. They are as malicious as the serpent, as bloodthirsty as the tiger that pounces on the unsuspecting from behind. A man who goes astray becomes an animal. A lost soul becomes a devil. Cling to the soul with love, fear, contempt, and hate, and don't let her out of your sight. She is a hellish divine treasure, a hellish divine treasure to be kept behind walls of iron and in the deepest vault. She always wants to get out and scatter glittering beauty. Beware, because you have already been betrayed. You'll never find a more disloyal, more cunning, and heinous woman than your soul. How should I praise the miracle of her beauty and perfection? Does she not stand in the brilliance of immortal youth? Is her love not intoxicating wine, and her wisdom the primordial cleverness of serpents? Shield men from her, and from her from men. Listen to what she wails and sings in prison, but don't let her escape, as she will immediately turn whore. As her husband, you are blessed through her, and therefore cursed. She belongs to the daimonic race of the Tom Thumbs and giants, and is only distantly related to humankind. If you seek to grasp her in human terms, you will be beside yourself. The excess of your rage, your doubt, and your love belong to her, but only the excess. If you give her this excess, humanity will be saved from the nightmare. For if you do not see your soul, you see her in fellow men, and this will drive you mad, since this devilish mystery and hellish spook can hardly be seen through. Shall I continue? Because he's going to keep just, okay, because he's just keep disparaging the inner voice.
Okay.
I think reading this too, there's reading it to read it, it's one thing, but reading this gives me the unsettling feeling that this kind of text is what seeds the propaganda of demonizing women. And and the problem is people go, oh, well, and I also have to, this is my rationality, this is my reason, this is my intellect demonizing my intuition. And and the problem is, you know, James Hillman, An Incredible Love of War, everyone trying to have love of power being right instead of the power of love of both, and the absolute in the relative and the relative in the absolute. As you know, Debbie aptly pulled those two apart because they're both together, and that's not dualism. It's not duality. Duality is when I get subject to the pendulum and I'm banging up against the guardrails on either side instead of driving down the track. And, you know, it's like you versus Tim. Well, you know, you're in one perspective, you know, driving along, navigating. He's in another perspective, driving along, navigating. You may be, you know, one in the right lane, one in the left lane, and neither are doing anything different from the outside, but the perspective from the inside is different. And I think that's relative and absolute. So what's interesting here is how this to me, Philemon now becomes the intellect as a petulant little teenager disparaging the soul.
Yeah, and I mean, one of the things that we have to take note of at this point is that Jung was putting things in a way that would have been put forward by men 100 years ago, a century ago. And he was born in 1875. So that was the world that he was brought up in. And we have been undergoing, especially in the United States and Western Europe and Japan to a certain degree, we have been undergoing a huge change of perspective, and vis-a-vis women especially. And you know, in Western Europe, I think the four leading countries had defense ministers who are women within the last decade. I don't know if it's true today, but it was true about 10 years ago. And that in Jung's time would have been unthought of. And today, the superintendent of the Naval Academy and the chief of naval operations in the United States are both women now. Um,
Mhm.
and so times have changed, folks. They really have changed from this. But use this writing as sort of a teaching about where we were, and think about how we've evolved in just a century, and we're evolving much faster psychologically in the psyche. Oh, thank you. My
That's
wife just brought me
evolution to have more qualities.
my wife just brought me a Dunkin' Donuts coffee. That was unexpected. Um, our evolution has changed so dramatically. I mean, just in my lifetime, I was in Japan going to high school in the early 1960s. And during that time, I never spoke to my grandparents on the telephone. We barely ever got mail from them, and we were just cut off. Um, and the advent of first the fax, and I mean, we had telex when I was in Japan 16 years later. But when I was in Japan the first time, which was 3 years, I was there another 5 years later. Um, the first time it was just telegrams. And the first time I went to China, I had to cut the tape myself for the telex machine so that I could send a telex. And nowadays we have email globally. We can talk to anybody we want globally, and the cost is next to nil compared to what it was in those days.
Hmm.
And so we are just evolving so fast. And I see my children, I sort of joke about them. I'm talking about my students who would love it. We take their cell phones away from them when they come in the door because I'm in an alternative school. And so they don't have their cell phones during the day. But that's not true of our school district, where, very often when I was substitute teaching over there, they are half the class will be on their cell phones. And I said to myself, geez, we just, instead of spending all this money on education, we ought to just pass out smartphones when people go into the eighth grade and say, good luck to you. Because
Well,
that's
and
how the kids are learning.
that's like kicking everybody out into the wild. Get eaten by the wolf or don't and come back. And so it's kind of gene pool weeding in a way. But it's interesting because I don't know where it was in the last week. Um, there was some comedy, something I was watching, and then there was this little intermission piece, and Sofia Vergara pops up, and there's this joke that's kind of apropos, and she said, "Oh, there's this German guy, and then there's this Asian guy, and there's this Mexican guy, and they're all in the sauna, and all of a sudden you hear beep 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 beep, and the German guy's tapping on his forearm, and he's like, "Oh, sorry guys, I didn't mean to, ignore you. I had a text." And then you hear this chuk chuk chuk, and then the Asian guy taps on the side of his head. He's like, "Oh, no, sorry guys, I was just getting an email." And the Mexican guy goes, "Wow, we don't have any of that technology. Oh, I'll be back. I have to use the bathroom." And so he leaves and he comes back. And I'm glad that she told it, because then the racist piece are just by example instead of being disparaging. So he comes back, and one of the guys goes, "Oh, you have some toilet paper stuck to your butt." And he goes, "Oh, no, no, I'm receiving a fax." So anyway, the
Oh my
context is
God.
important.
Right. Well, uh, Sherry asked an interesting question. She's asked a number of interesting social studies questions, but one is, who was Thomas Paine? And I would my rejoinder is, who was Alexander Hamilton? And what almost nobody knows, I went to Hamilton College, so I learned a little bit about this. But I remember asking one of my history professors, who was Alexander Hamilton? And he says, well, he was a founding father, and that's he was this. In fairness, this was my Asian history professor I asked this question of. He says, well, he's a founding father. Well, he was the first Secretary of the Treasury, but uh, Alexander Hamilton wrote about 84% of the Federalist Papers, which are the basis upon which our government was created. Okay. And so, among other things, he was really important for that. But he, he also um, was at age 23, I think, he was a lieutenant colonel in the Army, and he had become aide de camp to George Washington. And he was sent on a mission during the Revolutionary War to speak to the American general who was in Albany. It was a 3-day trip on horseback in ice and snow, which would be a really harrowing trip because the Adirondacks are there. And he was given the job of deciding how the Continental Army would be deployed during 1778, that year. They had been in Valley Forge, and the Army had been in Valley Forge. George Washington was there, and Washington sent his instructions to General Gates, who was in Albany, not very far away, 300 miles or so. And Washington's final instruction was, but if Gates has a better plan, go with his plan. So it was Hamilton's decision as a 23-year-old lieutenant colonel to decide how to deploy the Continental Army during a year of the Revolutionary War, among other things. And then he was instrumental in leading the attacks on Yorktown. He was released from being aide de camp and went into battle, and was one of the key guys that won the Battle of Yorktown, which caused Cornwallis to surrender. And he went on to be the first Secretary of the Treasury, and he created the national debt. and he did that because the southern states were the rich states at that time, and the men from the southern states, Washington, Madison, Patrick Henry, all those people had large estates, and the typical farm in the north was maybe 10 acres max. That's what John Adams's farm was. And so the northern states had to borrow money for the Revolutionary War. And so there was a big debate in Washington, and Hamilton organized a meeting between Thomas Jefferson and someone representing the North. I forget who that was, but it was a dinner party. It's called the Dinner Party. It was in 1789, I believe, or so. And what they did was they agreed that the country would pay the debt of the North, provided that the capital would be in the South. And that was the advent of Washington, D.C. of human beings. Hamilton had a love affair with a woman, um, and he ended up getting shot in a duel with the vice president of the United States.
Well, I appreciate that going into that, and then back to the question of who is Thomas Paine. And I don't think you were intentionally doing this, but Thomas Paine was trying to turn the sentiment away from supporting the war so as not to have the citizens taxed and have better relations between the countries instead of fighting them. And in a sense, he was the one who got demonized then for ostensibly doing the right thing, except saying it was the right thing is wrong to say, because there were so many things, as you said, going on there. And then Hamilton coming through, blah, 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 gets in a duel with the vice president. I mean, this reminds me of it's Andrew Jackson. He gets shot in the sternum and just
Mhm.
stares at the guy. The guy thinks he missed,
Mhm.
and Teddy Roosevelt spoke for 90 minutes after being shot. Well, these incidences are they're not disturbing. They're just, this is the different time. Now one giant something and everything, everybody hides under a leaf.
Right. So anyway, let's move on. And so the context of this basically is that Jung was a man of his time. We need to interpret this in the context of our lives. And and our lives have seen huge change. And if I talk to my mother-in-law, she lived in a home that had an ice box. Okay, that was a refrigerator where you put a big chunk of ice in the thing, and that kept your food cold. Those were the days. And so,
And that was high tech.
right, and human beings couldn't fly until 120 years ago. I mean, it's almost nothing of the human lifetime.
Completely. I mean, so again, back to, what's the relative? What's the relative?
Yeah.
What's the absolute? What's the absolute?
Right. And there's a great novel called Taipan by James Clavell, and it's about um, the origins of Hong Kong as it existed under British rule. And at that time, there were no telegrams, and uh, you had to wait a year for news about something that you had asked a question about. And I remember one scene, and this was about 1840, where the ship captains would put a little swatch of a black square on a corner of their sail as they were landing, because that would indicate that either the news was good or bad from London, and people who were working the stock exchange in Hong Kong could run and trade before everybody else got this news by a few hours, because people would be watching with their spyglasses, and when they saw a ship come in, they'd watch for that signal, and that would be their communication of whether things were good or bad. so we've come a
But
long way.
so I mean, that insider trading by a little black mark.
Mm-hmm. Right. And so now we do it with text messaging, but I think people are onto that. So you have to be even more sophisticated to get away with it
Well, it's
today.
interesting too. I think bringing that into context too, people, oh my God, insider trading. Well, when you look at it, I mean, Form 4 or whatever it is, when you see it on the market, um, you have to be careful that it's not specialized knowledge. Some of these people are pulling money because they got to pay for their kids' college or they need a new house. So you
Yeah.
have to make sure you understand why Form
Why they're,
4,
yeah.
why the insiders are trading, because insider trading is not inherently negative. And
Yeah.
sometimes it's just, oh, I gotta get a paycheck, pay my bills, so I'm gonna pull my money out. I mean,
Yeah. Well, well, I'm not going to go into that, but
yeah.
anyway,
So,
so let's read on. Look at man, the weak one, in his wretchedness and torment, whom the gods have singled out as their quarry. Tear to pieces the bloody veil that the lost soul has woven around man, the cruel nets woven by the death-bringing, and take hold of the divine whore, who still cannot recover from her fall from grace and craves filth and power and raving blindness. Lock her up like a lecherous bitch who would like to mingle her blood with every dirty cur. Capture her, may enough at last be enough. Let her for once taste your torment so that she will get to feel man and his hammer, which he has wrestled from the gods. May man rule in the human world. May his laws be valid, but treat the souls, demons, and gods in their way, offering what is demanded. But burden no man, demand and expect nothing from him with what your devil souls and your God souls lead you to believe, but endure and remain silent, and do piously what befits your kind. You should act not on the other, but on yourself, unless the other asks for your help or opinion. Do you understand what the other does? Never. How should you? Does the other understand what you do? Whence do you take the right to think about the other and act on him? You have neglected yourself, your garden is full of weeds, and you want to teach your neighbor about order and provide evidence of his shortcomings. Why should you keep silent about the others? Because there would be plenty to discuss concerning your own demons. But if you act on and think about the other without him soliciting your opinion or advice, you do so because you cannot distinguish yourself from your soul. Therefore, you fall victim to her presumption and help her into whoring. Or do you believe that you must lend your human power to the soul of the gods, or even that it will be useful and pious work if you want to bring the gods to bear on others? Blinded one, that is Christian presumptuousness. The gods don't need your help. You you laughable idolater who seem to yourself like a god and want to learn and want to form, improve, rebuke, educate, and create men. Are you perfect yourself? Therefore remain silent, mind your business, and behold your inadequacy every day. You are most in need of your own help. You should keep your opinions and good advice ready for yourself and not run to others like a whore that with understanding and the desire to help. You don't need to play God. What are demons who don't act on themselves, who don't act out of themselves? So let them go to work, but not through you, or else you yourself will become a demon to others. Leave them to themselves and don't preempt them with awkward love, concern, care, advice, and other presumptions. Otherwise, you would be doing the work of the demons. You yourself would become a demon and therefore go into a frenzy. But the demons are pleased at the raving of helpless men, advising, striving to help others. So stay quiet, fulfill the cursed work of redemption on yourself, for then the demons must torment themselves, and in the same way all your fellow men who do not distinguish themselves from their souls and let themselves be mocked by demons. Is it cruel to leave your blinded fellow human beings to their own devices? It would be cruel if you could open their eyes, but you could open their eyes only if they solicited your opinion and help. Yet if they do not need your help. If you force your help on them nonetheless, you become their demon and increase their blindness, since you set a bad example. Draw the coat of patience and silence over your head. Sit down and leave the demon to accomplish his work. If he brings something about, he will work wonders. Thus will you sit under fruit-bearing trees. Know that the demons would like to inflame you to embrace their work, which is not yours. And you fool, you believe that it is you and that it is your work. Why? Because you can't distinguish yourself from your soul. But you are distinct from her, and you should not pursue whoring with other souls as if you yourself were a soul. But instead, you are a powerless man who needs all his force for his own completion. Why do you look to the other? What you see in him lies neglected in yourself. You should be the guard before the prison of your soul. You are your soul's eunuch, who protects her from gods and men, or protects the gods and men from her. Power is given to the weak man, a poison that paralyzes even the gods, like a poison sting bestowed upon the little bee whose force is far inferior to yours. Your soul could seize this poison and thereby endanger even the gods. So put the soul under wraps, distinguish yourself from her, since not only your fellow men, but also the gods must live. When Philemon had finished, I turned to my soul, who had come near from above during Philemon's speech, and spoke to her. Have you heard what Philemon has been saying? How does this tone strike you? Is his advice good? But she said, do not mock, or else you strike yourself. Do not forget to love me. It is difficult for me to unite hate and love, I replied. I understand, she said, yet you know that it is the same. Hate and love mean the same to me. Like all women of my kind, form matters less to me than that everything belonged to me or else to no one. I am also jealous of the hate you give others. I want everything, since I need everything for the great journey that I intend to begin after your disappearance. I must prepare a good time. Until then, I must make timely provision, and much is still lacking. And do you agree that I throw you into prison? I asked. Of course, she answered. There I have peace and can collect myself. Your human world makes me drunk. So much human blood, I could get intoxicated on it to the point of madness. Doors of iron, walls of stone, cold darkness, and the rations of penance. That is the bliss of redemption. You do not suspect my torment when the body intoxication seizes me, hurls me again and again into living matter from a dark, fearful, creative urge that formerly brought me to close the lifeless and ignited the terrible lust for procreation in me. Remove me from conceiving matter, the rutting feminine of yawning emptiness. Force me into confinement where I can find resistance and my own law, where I can think about the journey, the rising sun, the dead one spoke of, and the buzzing melodious golden wings. Be thankful. Don't you want to thank me? You are blinded. You deserve my highest thanks. Filled with delight at these words, I cried, how divinely beautiful you are. And at the same time, fury seized me. O bitterness, you have drugged me through sheer and utter hell. You have tormented me nearly to death, and I long for your thanks. Yes, I am moved that you thank me. The hound's nature lies in my blood. Therefore, I am bitter for my sake, since how does it move you? You are divine and devilishly great, wherever and howsoever you are. As yet, I am only your eunuch, doorkeeper, no less imprisoned than you. Speak, you concubine of heaven, you divine monster. Have I not fished you from the swamp? How do you like the black hole? Speak without blood, sing from your own face. You have gorged yourself on men. Then my soul writhed and, like a downtrodden worm, turned and cried out, pity, have compassion. Compassion? Have you ever had compassion for me? You brute bestial tormentor. You've never gotten past compassionate moods. You lived on human food and drank my blood. Has it made you fat? Will you learn to revere the torment of the human animal? What would you souls and gods want without man? Why do you long for him? Speak. She sobbed. My speech stops. I'm horrified at your accusation. Are you going to get serious? Are you going to have second thoughts? Are you going to learn modesty and perhaps even some other human virtue, you soulless soul being? Yes, you have no soul because you are the thing itself. You fiend. Would you like a human soul? Should I perhaps become your earthly soul so that you will have a soul? You see, I've gone to your school. I've learned how one behaves as a soul, perfectly ambitious, mysteriously untruthful, and hypocritical. While I spoke to my soul in this way, Philemon stood silently a little distance off. But now he stepped forward, laid his hand on my shoulder, and spoke in my name. You are blessed, virgin soul. Praised be your name. You are the chosen one among women. You are the God-bearer. Praise be to you. Honor and fame be yours in eternity. You lived in a golden temple. The peoples come from afar and praise you. We, your vassals, wait on your words. We drink red wine, dispensing a sacrificial drink in recollection of the meal of blood that you celebrated with us. We prepare a black chicken for a sacrificial meal in remembrance of the man who fed you. We invite our friends to the sacrificial meal, carrying wreaths of ivy and roses in remembrance of the farewell you took from your saddened vassals and maids. Let this day be a festival celebrating joy and life, the day upon which you, blessed one, commenced the return journey for the land of men where you have learned how to be a soul. You follow the Son who ascended and passed over. You carry us up as your soul and set yourself before the Son of God, maintaining your immortal right as an ensouled being. We are joyful. Good things will follow you. We lend you strength. We are the land of men, and we are alive. After Philemon had ended, my soul looked saddened and pleased, and hesitated and yet hurried to prepare herself to leave us and to ascend again happy at the regained freedom. But I suspected something secret in her, something that she sought to hide from me. Therefore, I did not let her make off, but spoke to her. What holds you back? What are you hiding? Probably a golden vessel, a jewel that you have stolen from me. Isn't that a gem, a piece of gold shining through your robe? What is the beautiful thing that you robbed when you drank the blood of men and ate their sacrificial flesh? Speak the truth, for I see the lie on your face. I haven't taken anything, she answered, annoyed. You're lying. You want to cast suspicion on me. Where are you lacking? Those times when you could rob men unpunished are over. Surrender everything that is your sacred, that is his sacred inheritance, and that you have rapaciously claimed. You have stolen from the vassal and the beggar. God is rich and powerful. You can steal from him. His kingdom knows no loss. Shameful liar, when his kingdom knows no loss, shameful liar. When will you finally stop plaguing and robbing your humanity? But she looked at me as innocently as a dove and said gently, I did not suspect you. I wish you well. I respect your right. I acknowledge your humanity. I do not take anything away from you. I do not withhold anything from you. You possess everything. I, nothing. Yet, I exclaimed, you lie insufferably. You possess not only that marvelous thing that belongs to me, but you also have access to the gods and eternal fullness. Therefore, surrender what you have stolen, liar. Now she was vexed and replied, how can you? I no longer recognize you. You are crazy, even more, you are laughable, a childish ape who extends his paw toward everything that glitters. But I will not allow that what is mine to be taken from me. Then I cried enraged. You're lying, you're lying. I saw the gold. I saw the sparkling light of the jewel. I know it belongs to me. You ought not take that. You ought not take that away from me. Give it back. Then she broke out in defiant tears and said, I don't want to part with it. It's too precious to me. Do you want to rob me of the last ornament? Embellish yourself with the gold of the gods, but not with the meager treasures of earthbound human beings. May you taste heavenly poverty after you have preached earthly poverty and necessity to your humankind, like a true and proper cleric, full of lies, who fills his belly and purse and preaches poverty. You torment me awfully, she wailed. Leave me just this one. You men still have enough. I cannot be without this very one, this incomparable one, for whose sake even the gods have made men. I will not be unjust, I replied, but give me what belongs to me and beg for what you need from it. What is it? Speak. Alas, that I can neither keep in you it nor conceal it. It is love, warm human love. Blood, warm red blood, the holy source of life, the unification of everything separated and longed for. So I said, it is
That was
love.
heavy.
Yeah.
This is really heavy. I feel that he's really going at it with his ego conscious, and he's communicating with his anima, but in a
Mm,
way where he is trying to, he's demanding from her this treasure that he has, whatever it is, wisdom or his authentic self, knowing who he is and establishing himself from most likely his patients or other leaders that he has idolized, or from the heroes and villains that he has read about
yep.
that recur in images or symbols in his day to day. And so now he is basically having this mother-son fight, or like lover to lover quarrel, where they're really going at it, and he's demanding, well, I gave you, now where is the return, but it's
Right.
also kind of it's also kind of egocentric, because he is demanding so much from the soul, but at the same time not so much, because it's almost as if he had that, if you had that one chance to talk to your soul, what would you say, kind of thing, like
Right.
this was his one shot. So now he's really going for it, just like as if a genie comes up to you and says, you have 3 wishes. Well, now that I'm up to my third and final wish, I just want to let you know you owe me.
Right.
I really
Uh,
think I'm glad you brought that up, Amela, because what's interesting to me here in the whole Nietzsche, beware that when fighting monsters, do not become a monster. He's not becoming a monster, but what I find is answer to Job had Job being tortured by the unconscious God and the devil's son. And then what's interesting here, this is the full role reversal of answer to Job. And this is the true answer to Job, where Job's in power. Jung's the one who's being spoken to and advised and petitioned to, rather than being tormented. So, in a sense, Philemon and the soul here are both the ones who are now Job, and Jung is the one who's actually in the power of love, as it was, listening to both. So when you said the lover's quarrel piece, he's fighting with both. In a sense, in a dance, they're fighting. He's just curious and dancing.
yeah. All right. Well, we have to call this to an end at some point here. I read for a long time, and I apologize. I didn't stop. And I'm actually trying to find my place because I've gone so far.
Yeah, you.
Are we up to, so I said it is love that you
Okay,
claim?
we're
Yeah.
up to yes, that's correct. And so what I suggest we do is come back to this and talk about it a bit more next week. Um, Jung is, keep in mind, this is all going on in Jung's head. And, can you imagine having an argument like this in your own head? Right? With different persona and so on. No wonder people go crazy.
Oh, and it's like he's doing his own therapy to um, get past mom and dad, mentor, tormentor, spirit, soul.
Right.
I mean,
Right.
spirit, intellect, soul, intuition. I mean,
Yeah.
there's a whole lot of. It's like he has a. I feel like the internal civil war is intuition and feeling versus thinking and sensation. And
Yeah.
that lover's quarrel you were talking about, Amela, is soul, intuition, and feeling, and then the spirit is intellect and sensation. So the depth and the dark and the light and the heights. I think that lover's quarrel is a really good way to put it, because neither is wrong, neither is right, but there is a big misunderstanding is the key piece. And to get to an empathic place where, oh, I see this is intense to you, and you see this is intense to me. And if we compromise, both of us will be disappointed, because that's the nature of compromise, but we
Mhm.
will learn how to move forward better. So there's a whole lot of, and I'm glad when you put it to a lover's quarrel piece. There's the each of the lovers, and then there's the relationship as the we there, and you don't want either of the parts to tear apart the we. And it reminds me of, I guess, one of the few quotes I love by Freud: how bold one becomes when they are sure of being loved. So when you don't get someone who tries to run away from conflict, or someone who tries to solve it too fast because they don't like conflict that way, realize the conflict is a different form of discussion. But here, like, wow, I see why people go nuts, because if he gets stuck there, then the quicksand of self will take him down. But if you can relax into conflict when someone really rises up in a storm, that just means listen more deeply, because this is that important to them. So I think the lover's quarrel you brought up is a really good example to
But not too deeply where you become so obsessed with it and infatuated and it consumes you, which is kind of what I think is happening here. So Jung is saying, listen, I understand that I'm close to insanity, but I'm not trying to jump in and, I'm not trying to dive in. I'm just dipping my toes into this lake of insanity. I'm not jumping in there.
Right.
Well, yeah, exactly. It's
Good
funny you say
point.
that, because one of Jung's quotes is, "Show me a sane person and I will cure them for you." So he's
oh yeah,
he's going to get them to
yeah, that's my favorite quote by him. And excuse me, it's just so unbelievable because things look so much easier than they actually are. When, for example, when that book Eat, Pray, Love was in everyone's hands on the New York City subway system, all of people, teenagers, middle-aged women, senior women, all reading Eat, Pray, Love. Everyone's just so into this book, and all of a sudden everyone wants to become a shaman, everyone wants to become enlightened, everybody wants to delve deep into themselves, but it's so dangerous. It looks so easy. It's as easy as baking a pie. My mom tried to bake a pie and it wasn't that great. I'm sorry, Mom. You're never going to watch this video, but in case you do, your pie was horrible.
Yeah.
It looks so easy, with the little graham cookies and just put the applesauce in. It looks so simple, but it's easier imagined than done, like a road trip. You think you're going to go cross country, but you never know. You're going to get a flat tire. And
it's
you're going to have those moments.
It's like me trying to install a new sink by myself. My wife found out that it's better to have an aluminum sink rather than a porcelain sink. And so she wanted this aluminum sink. So I decided, okay, they have them over at Home Depot. I'm going to go get me a aluminum sink and I'm going to install the thing. Well, no. A journeyman plumber can install that, but not me. So I did get the sink into the space, and then I tried to hook up, all the drains and stuff, and I couldn't find how to avoid all the leaks that I was having, and so in the end, I had to call the plumber to have him install the darn thing. And so, the fact that Jung, basically he's going through this and he himself knows in his heart of hearts, such as it is, that as a psychiatrist, that this is really dangerous area. And Richard makes a good comment. I see this as an occult thing, not as a psychosis. And Jung's experience was truly of religious proportions. Well, yeah, it certainly was that.
And I think also that religious proportion is the apotheosis. It's the apotheosis, the highest penultimate form, where he's not speaking to his inner eye or an inner neighbor. It's the community, it's the church of the divinity inside. So there's really an apotheosis, which is the Western word for nirvana or enlightenment. So I think going back to Deb's, the relative and the absolute, he's swimming in the absolute with relative partners of the divine.
whatever the divine is
Right.
to every person. You know, for some people, maybe Satan is the divine, you know, because it embodies all of these these qualities that are sort of the qualities that are so difficult for us to admit that we have, like greed or adultery. You know, not many people can say, well, you know what, I'm a proud adulterer. You know, they don't just go into Sex Addicts Anonymous and say, I am such a proud adulterer, I am so proud.
Well, okay, so we've delved into the proclivities of the human soul, and you know, the naysayers of the human soul, the magician Philemon, who was pagan, and
And that makes an interesting piece. Philemon, intellect, sensation, bright, height, light, is pagan, which is nature and depths and dark. So, I mean, when you said that's beautiful, when Philemon is pagan, that means Philemon is in denial of his own nature. And then the soul, intuition and feeling, is in denial of her own intellect and nature of consciousness.
mhm,
So I think it's interesting here that the consciousness having denial of its unconscious and the unconscious having denial of the conscious. So they're in this, well, Amela put it, lovers quarrel, except that neither is going to change. And they're both need a dignity and difference. So
mhm.
there's a lot going on in this dipping the toes in, as Amela said.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to close this. Tim, Tim was having this argument with me, or not an argument, but a bit of a squabble, I guess, about about what is duality and and then we got to the point of the absolute, right? And my final point is that it's not the right thing to find. I mean, what we have to do is find balance, but that balance is based on thousands of dualities. That's the issue. It's not, if I pull harder to the left or right, I'm going to win, and therefore everything will be hunky-dory. That's not true at all. Okay, there won't be balance then. And so what all of us need to do is we need to find balance. Okay, and that balance involves many dualities. So the absolute is in balance. The universe is in balance. It knows what it's doing.
Right.
And has
And it
always.
doesn't need to.
Yeah.
It knows and it doesn't need to know. It just lives itself into being.
Yeah, and if we right, and if we try to adjust the balance of the universe, it's us that's going to lose. We lose when we try to do that. And
Well, it reminds me of rock climbing. Don't ever get in a fight with the mountain, because the mountain will always win.
right. And as five of my fellow Marines learned this past week when they flew their helicopter into the side of the mountain does always win. And so I'm going to close this out by showing the status of my large piece, which is Vision of America, #1. That's the name of it. And I've been working on it since January 19th. And so this morning I completed the doodle, which is the first stage of my process. And so I'm going to show you my doodle, and then in the future you'll see. And what I'm trying to achieve always is balance. Okay, and so here it is. And up in the upper left area, you can see where evil emerged. And now you can see where evil is leaking out also. Evil leaked out a bit to the upper, headed up toward the northwest there. and that's the Purple Lake thing here. And so over this past week, the evil has leaked out and it's moving up through here. I don't know what's going to happen with it after this, but that's where I am. And I'll show you another study. This is a study I completed this week. Now, I'm not very happy with this study because, and that's why it's a study, because I wanted to try using scarlet and gold, which are Marine Corps colors, and also I was trying to get the blue, navy blue, that is used in Marine Corps dress uniforms, which I don't have navy blue, but I have Prussian blue. And so I was using that too. And as you see, I had to tone it down. But the most interesting thing I found coming out of this particular study is the orange men. And as I sort of consider myself a hard-headed Dutchman, even though it's only a quarter of my parentage, the orange man represents the hard-headed Dutchman who emerged here. And so then this is my next study.
Sorry, Skip.
Huh?
I'm sorry to interrupt your train of thought. Is it possible? I have a friend here who doesn't want to be on camera, but he wants to know, how do you start with this process?
Okay, that's what I have on the screen right now, which is my doodle. And if you look about 60% up on the right side, you see a spot in green. Okay, that is my where I've gotten to in my doodle. Okay, and what I do is I start wherever my psyche says to start. Pick a color that's not going to be too. I'm doing this in watercolor, so I'm using for my doodle what's called light orange, which allows me to create my doodle. It's sort of my two-tone doodle. And so this represents as far as I've gotten on this study. Now this piece is 16 by 20, so I'm trying a bit larger piece, but not as large as the one that I can only do on weekends because it's too big to be in our apartment. But I can use this one 16 by 20 to see how it comes out. So I do this in the mornings, 1 hour, when I first get up in the morning, usually about 6, and I just let the paint go wherever my psyche tells it to go. And what is going to come out of the conversation with Colleen is, and she's been using the doodle for decades, and you create a mark. Okay, and so this is my mark. Nobody can copy this. When you do it for yourself, yours will be different. And so don't worry about that. Just go wherever your unconscious tells you to put the paint. And then what I've been doing is I'm filling in the spaces with colors Some of these spaces are pretty big though, so I'm not considering that to be the final step. So if I look at this one, which is complete now, I filled in the color, but then I have done basically Rocky within the spaces. So I have three stages. The first stage is the doodle, the second stage is coloring the doodle, and the third stage is Rocky within each doodle space. And I think these are getting quite interesting, actually. At least I like them. And so this is a start that I have about 3 days work into, probably 3.5, 4 hours to do this. And you should do it just as a meditation technique and just see what happens to your psyche. When you start paying attention to your psyche will start paying attention to you. And so when that happens, you'll see how much you want to do this. Okay. And so I find it's difficult for me, except I get tired, physically tired after about an hour and 15 minutes of work, and then I have to quit for the day. But you'll see that once you start doing it, it's hard to stop, and it's hard to not keep going. But your body will tell you when you have to stop. That's for sure.
Mhm.
That's your unconscious too, I guess. But the question is, how do you achieve balance? Okay. And that's where what I'm talking about in my vision of America. We're not perfect. We have lots of different colors and religions and you name it, attitudes, etc., in our country. But in essence, we're in balance. I mean, if you go to the grocery store, I mean, in my school, every day we have fist fights, believe it or not. And it's an alternative school where we're trying to guide kids out of that behavior. But if you go out into the grocery store or the pharmacy or what have you, we're not having fist fights every day. We live in balance basically as a country, and if anything, we seek out unique cuisines, etc., to enjoy. We go to a Salvadoran restaurant or a Italian restaurant or a wasp restaurant, whatever it is, and that we enjoy them all. And we don't need to be having fistfights over it. And we have to try to educate our societies such that we do live in balance. And when things get out of whack, sometimes they get out of whack pretty bad, and so, but we need to draw back from that. Okay, it seems to me that instead of thinking, well, I'm blue or I'm red, my color statement is either green shirts or purple shirts, preferably, because they represent a balance between other colors. And so that's kind of what we have to be doing. And it's sort of symbolic of the discussion between Tim and me, because Tim is emphasizing the duality, and I say this is far beyond the duality. This is balance. We have to find balance in the world. And then if we find balance, then we're going to have fewer wars, in my opinion. But as long as we keep going for duality and trying to pull one way or the other, we're going to continue to be in trouble. And so Jung, going through all this stuff that we went through today, he's just experiencing this stuff for the first time for him. Unfortunately, he was already a made psychiatrist when this happened. And so he put it all down, and then he knew it was important. And so he worked on the Red Book for 16 years, trying to put all this stuff together and trying to understand it for himself, what was going on with himself. And so it is raw. It's quite raw what we were reading today. And
I think the raw is important because it keeps its intensity. It doesn't make it all nice. It doesn't, it doesn't dial it down. It's no, this is you're dealing with intensities. And I think the ability to not take them personally, to receive and acknowledge and experience them, then you can respond or not, instead of reacting, which, going back to Amella's lover's quarrel, the ones that end up in a big nuclear blast and both get blasted to the neutral corners of out the door or some other room, versus, wow, this is really important to us. And you find some humor in the storm.
Right. So Richard says, the middle path is the hardest. Many are called, but few are chosen. But what I want to emphasize, that this isn't the middle path between two opposites. This is a middle path where there is a balance. The world is on a balance, and it's like this. And sometimes it gets a bit wobbly, and we need to find a way to find balance in our lives, and find balance in our society, and find balance in our country, find balance among humans all over the world. That's what we need to do.
And start with the balance within oneself.
Yep. Start with yourself.
Yes.
Otherwise, you can't see it. I mean, you'll be, oh, it's a fight. Why does some people actually take conversation as conflict? If anyone asks them a question, they feel like they're in trouble. And instead of, no, questions imply interest, even if it's a pointed question. Well, it's pointed interest. But it's not bad.
Right. And Sherry comments that Jung said himself, "I'm not Jungian." He said, "Thank goodness I'm Jung and not a Jungian."
Yeah.
And so Jung did find balance in his life, and it involves some things that maybe society that frowns upon. He lived in a menage a trois for 50 years or more, with Tony Wolfe and his wife Emma, and somehow they made it work. And
that's an expression, I think, goes back to Amella's, oh, look, I'm proud to be an adulterer. Well, then the word can be a judgmental piece. He and Emma and Tony Wolfe, they liked what they liked, and they loved what they loved. And there's a very sovereign inner authority for living your life, not as a democracy, in the way that you and your, in his sense, two partners make the rules, and no one else gets a say. And because no one else gets a say.
Yeah, it's not that easy, but going back to the wars, it's I think for the war portion, it's more like siblings than anima and animus, more or less. because just like Israel and Palestine, they are two brothers that are fighting right now.
Right,
So
definitely. Surely.
or North Korea and South Korea, two brothers are fighting.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of sibling rivalry going on in the world today,
Cain and Abel.
in my perspective.
Yep. Cain and Abel live.
Yeah.
Okay. Goodbye, everyone. Thank you for being here. We'll see you next week. And please don't forget Colleen Kuber's interview next Saturday at 2 p.m. Eastern Time, 11 a.m. Pacific Time. And if you don't have the link, please write to me at skipconover@gmail.com and I'll send it to you. Okay, it's going to be an important interview, so please come. Bye-bye.